In a single weekend, 9 million citizens mobilized across the United States. This No King movement didn't follow a central script. It flared up in deep red rural towns and deep blue coastal cities simultaneously, driven by a spontaneous, cross-partisan frustration. From the outside, the optics are dire. To an observer in London, Tokyo, or Beijing, this level of internal friction looks like the terminal paralysis of a superpower, a society finally breaking under the weight of its own contradictions. But Ho Pin, the veteran strategist and host of Point Today, argues that the world is misreading the signal. He approaches this volatility not as a partisan observer, but as a student of how civilizations actually decay and how they persist. His thesis suggests these fractures serve a specific purpose. They are the violent immune response of a democratic system that refuses to stagnate. The unrest is the high-intensity signal of a social organism fighting to stay relevant. If we label this friction as mere collapse, we miss the actual mechanics at work. We fail to see the agonizing, necessary process of an institution attempting a generational overhaul to survive a new century. To understand the current friction, we look back at the late 20th century assumption that Western democracy had reached a final, stable state. Francis Fukuyama famously called it the end of history, the idea that the ideological race was over and the finish line had been crossed. Ho Pin argues this was a fundamental miscalculation. Civilizations don't reach a finish line, they enter cycles of institutional fatigue. The structures that provided stability for decades eventually become too rigid to handle new realities. This fatigue triggers 3 specific crises. First, the connective tissue of trust between those who make the rules and those who live by them begins to rupture. The legitimacy of the center is no longer a given. It is a point of constant, aggressive contestation. This leads to a widening gap between elite decision-making and mass public reality, while the international frameworks designed for a previous era begin to hollow out. The old rules simply cannot hold the weight of current geopolitical demands. This isn't a problem that a single election can solve. When the foundations themselves are fatigued, the system requires more than a change in leadership. It requires a structural reconstruction that can only happen through high-pressure conflict. Look again at those 9 million people on the street. Through the lens of strategic sociology, their presence is a diagnostic check on the health of the American public. Ho Pin identifies this as an immune rejection. It is the instinctual reaction of a society that detects an overexpansion of central power and moves to neutralize it. This mobilization happened without a central party command or state-sponsored coordination. It was an unforced, spontaneous gathering that bypassed traditional political machinery. This level of self-organized resistance, occurring across a broad demographic, suggests that the basic habit of public dissent, the civic muscle memory, is still functioning. The public has not yet reached the stage of apathy that precedes civilizational death. As long as the instinct to question authority and resist overreach remains this aggressive, the mechanism for self-correction remains operational. The noise is proof that the system is still being driven by its citizens. America's loud, chaotic reaction to institutional fatigue is unique when compared to other mature democracies facing the exact same structural pressures. Ho Pin looks at Europe and sees a continent struggling with the same decline, but its response is often one of preservation and institutional pride. It is a reaction slowed by its own historical weight. In Japan, the response to systemic fatigue has been characterized by a profound societal silence, a quiet stagnation where the social contract persists, but the energy for radical change has leveled off. History shows that empires typically die through this kind of silent, unaddressed decay. By comparison, America's relentless self-criticism and street-level noise are its greatest survival assets. It is too loud to rot in silence. The civil unrest we see today is a form of creative destruction. It is the friction required to force a new balance out of institutions that have become too rigid to serve the public. This is a high-stakes feedback loop. It requires courts that still operate, journalists who continue to investigate, and a public that refuses to stop shouting. This continuous conflict prevents the system from settling into a terminal, stagnant equilibrium. There is real risk here. Survival isn't a certainty, and the process of reconstruction is always painful. But the sheer intensity of this struggle over rules and trust demonstrates that the nation's internal energy hasn't been exhausted. It is worth noting that Ho Pin offers this perspective from a background rooted in a nation that was historically a primary adversary of the United States. He is analyzing the mechanics of power and resilience as a strategic realist. Ultimately, American civil unrest isn't the sound of an empire's doom. It is the brutal, necessary heartbeat of a civilization that is still fighting for its future. The chaos isn't the end. It's the only way the system knows how to change.